Picture a church. No, actually, picture what used to be a church. Picture the saints knocked off their pedestals and the stained glass blown out so the wind comes through at night and lifts the corners of the sheets. Picture the pews stacked against the walls to make room for the cots. 200 of them crammed in so tight that the orderlies have to turn sideways to pass between them. And lying on those cots, the most broken men you have ever seen in your life. Now fill that church with the smell. First comes the carbolic acid, so sharp it makes your eyes water before you're through the door. Then underneath it, almost hidden, iodoform, the antiseptic that every wound in this war gets packed with, yellow-brown and sticky, with a smell like chlorine and something worse. And under that, if you're unlucky enough to work the post-operative section, the thing nobody ever tells you about when they're recruiting nurses for France, the smell of gangrene. Not dramatic. Not like rot in a bin somewhere. More like overripe fruit. Like peaches that have gone wrong, sweet and faintly wrong and absolutely unmistakable once you know it. And the first time you smell it, you're going to look for the source. And when you find it, you're going to try not to show anything on your face because the man whose leg it's coming from is looking at you. Add mud, not regular mud, Belgian mud. The mud of Flanders, which has its own particular quality, grey and chalky and clingy, capable of pulling a man's boot off his foot if he's not careful, capable of swallowing artillery shells whole, capable of filling a shell crater so completely that men fall in and drown in it. This mud has made its way into the church on the boots of orderlies and the stretchers of bearers and the backs of men who came in face down, and no amount of scrubbing ever gets it entirely off the floor. And underneath all of this, the sound, artillery, 22 miles northeast, give or take, constant, like someone rearranging furniture in a house very far away. You stopped noticing it after the first week, then you started noticing when it stopped, which is its own kind of terrifying. That is Casualty Clearing Station number 17, Belgium, August 1917, the most important place in the most important war in the history of the world, staffed by women who weren't allowed to vote. We're going back there tonight, not as visitors standing at a safe distance reading the plaques, not as tourists of suffering, not as historians with clean hands and comfortable offices who have read the accounts and arranged them into chapters. We're living it. One shift, one nurse, one discovery made in the middle of 10,000 different emergencies. That would take 2 more years and an ocean and a peacetime advertising campaign to become something your grandmother bought at a drugstore without having to ask out loud what it was. I make these history stories, and somewhere along the way I realised that the history that matters most is not always the history that gets a monument. Sometimes it's the history that nobody talked about precisely because it was considered too ordinary, too female, too embarrassing to commemorate. Sometimes the most significant discoveries are the ones made in supply rooms rather than laboratories, by women whose names didn't make the official reports. So, get comfortable, however comfortable you can get, wherever you are right now. Turn the lights down. This one starts in the dark. Here we go. Your eyes open at 2:47 in the morning. Not because you want them to. Your body is doing the opposite of wanting. Every muscle pulling toward the thin mattress of the camp cot, toward the 2 hours of sleep still remaining before your shift officially starts. But you're awake because Sister Matheson is standing in the doorway of the nurses' quarters with a candle in her hand, not moving, not saying anything yet, which is actually somehow more alarming than if she were shouting. You've learned to read Sister Matheson's silences in the 6 weeks you've been at CCS 17. This particular silence means there is not time to explain. This one means come now. This one means whatever you are planning for the next several hours of your life, forget it. You sit up. The camp cot makes its usual complaint, the canvas sagging, the metal frame flexing, and beside you, 3 feet away, Nurse Eleanor Price opens one eye. "Convoy," Eleanor says. She doesn't ask. Her voice is flat with the particular exhaustion of someone who's been woken by emergency so many times that the emotion has been worn off it entirely, the way a word stops meaning anything if you say it enough. You're already reaching for your apron. The nurses' quarters are a converted stable behind the main building, a farmhouse and its outbuildings that the British Army commandeered somewhere in 1915 and has been using as a casualty station ever since. The farmhouse itself is the receiving ward and operating theatre. The smaller building to the east is where the post-operative cases go. The big converted barn, which has lost its roof to a shell that came too close 6 months before your arrival, is where the walking wounded wait for transport. You share the stable with 5 other nurses. Eleanor, who's from Sheffield and has been here since 1916, and treats everything with the dry, flat humour that you've come to rely on. Nurse Bridget Farrell from Cork, who prays quietly and constantly and is terrifyingly good at putting in stitches. And 2 others, Nurse Lawrence, who cries very softly at night when she thinks everyone's asleep, and Nurse Kaminsky, a Polish-American from Chicago who volunteered through the Red Cross the same month you did and arrived here 2 weeks before you, and has therefore positioned herself as your unofficial expert on all things. That's 5. The 6th cot belongs to whoever is on night duty. Empty now, because Nurse Barnes is already in the wards dealing with whatever's coming. Outside you hear it. Engines. The particular grinding sound of military ambulances navigating a road that was never meant for military ambulances. The vehicles heaving over shell holes and ruts with the slow, determined suffering of large animals. You tie your apron. You pin your cap. You check that the small notebook in your pocket has a pencil attached. You lost a pencil on day 3 and Sister Matheson noted it with an expression that you have never forgotten. And you follow Sister Matheson out of the stable into the Belgian night. It is cold for August. The air smells of mud and distant smoke, and something electric that might be an approaching storm, or might be your exhausted brain manufacturing weather to explain the low-level dread that has been living in your chest for 6 weeks. The moon is behind clouds. The farmyard is lit by a single electric bulb strung on a wire between 2 posts, casting a circle of yellow light that makes everything outside it seem blacker than it would otherwise be. The first ambulance is already pulling through the gate. "How many?" you ask Sister Matheson. 37 so far. She says it the way someone might say 37 parcels have arrived and need sorting. There are still coming. The word from the ADS is at least 60 total, possibly more. An advanced dressing station. So these men came through a dressing station first, which means they've already been sorted once, the most critical cases already separated out, the dead already left behind. 60 is a bad number. 60, when CCS 17 officially holds 200 patients and is currently holding 243, is a very bad number. You do not say this. Sister Matheson is already walking toward the first ambulance, and you follow. Your name is Agnes Morton. You're 22 years old. You grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a brick house on Fairview Avenue, 3rd child of Walter Morton, who sells insurance, and Margaret Morton née Hayes, who has opinions about everything, and raised her children to be competent in the same way that some people raise children to be kind. as though competence were the fundamental virtue, the foundation that everything else gets built on. You trained at St. Mary's Hospital in Cincinnati from 1913 to 1916. You received your certificate in the spring of 1916. You worked for 14 months in the hospital's medical ward before the United States entered the war in April 1917, at which point you were one of roughly 30,000 American nurses who volunteered within the first 2 months of the declaration. You arrived at Southampton in June. You were at the base hospital in Rouen for 3 weeks, which felt like medical school after everything you'd already been through, but which was, you've come to understand, genuinely necessary preparation. You arrived at CCS 17 on the 6th of August. That was 38 days ago. Tonight is your 39th night in Belgium, and the ambulances are still coming through the gate, and you are walking toward the first one because that is what you do. The back doors of the ambulance open from inside, pushed by the orderly who has ridden back there with the casualties. He's a young man named Davies, Private Davies, who's been doing this since 1915, and who no longer reacts to anything he sees in those vehicles with anything other than a focused efficiency. 4 in here, he says. 2 critical, 2 serious. The one on the left is losing blood faster than... Name, you say. He hasn't been able to... The tag. Private Davies pulls a small paper tag tied to the man's wrist. By the light of the lantern that has appeared in the hands of another orderly, you read, Private T. Haggerty, 5th Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers, wound to left thigh, arterial tourniquet, applied at 21:15. 2:47 now. That is nearly an hour and a half with the tourniquet on his thigh. You know what that means for the leg. You know what it might mean for the man. Operating ward, you say. Now. Fast. You're already moving to the next stretcher. This is your life. This is what it looks like in actual practice, stripped of everything you were taught in the classroom, stripped of the clean linens and the bedside manner and the orderly progression from admission to treatment to recovery that exists in civilian hospitals, stripped of everything except the essential question, what does this person need in the next 30 seconds, and do we have it? You work your way through the first ambulance. Second critical, chest wound, gurgling breath that you recognise without anyone having to tell you. Third, facial burns, but eyes intact, conscious, able to answer questions, which moves him down the priority list temporarily. Fourth, both legs, shrapnel, stable enough to wait. You make notes in your small notebook. You tell Private Davies where each man goes. Davies nods and shouts instructions to the stretcher bearers who are appearing from every direction. Behind you, the second ambulance has arrived. And the third. You do not stop moving for the next 4 hours. The receiving ward, what used to be the main farmhouse, 2 rooms knocked into one, fills within the first hour. You've learned to move differently in a full ward. Not running. Running sends the wrong signal, makes the men who can see you anxious, makes them ask questions when you need them quiet. But a kind of controlled urgency, a fast walk that becomes a jog only when you round a corner where no patient can see you. Sister Matheson calls it purposeful movement. You call it the shuffle trot. Eleanor calls it something unprintable that she learned from the Yorkshire miner she grew up near. The lighting is inconsistent. The main ward has electric bulbs. A luxury, really, compared to some stations you've heard about. But when the load increases and the generator struggles, the lights dim to something barely distinguishable from candlelight, and you learn to do your work in the grey half-dark, reading the colour of a man's skin by touch as much as sight, pressing the back of your hand to a forehead, and knowing from the heat whether you're dealing with infection or shock, or just the ordinary warmth of a body that has been overworked for 3 years. Private Haggerty goes directly to the operating theatre with Dr. Hartley. You don't follow. Your job is in the receiving ward, but you watch the doors close behind the stretcher and note the time. 2:58. The leg will probably come off. You file this thought somewhere behind everything else and move on. The faces of the men are the thing that stays with you longest, not the wounds. You've stopped seeing wounds the way you used to, stopped seeing them as the primary fact of a person. The wounds are problems to be solved, but the faces are something else. Some of them are very young. Some of them are young in the way that men who haven't slept properly in 6 months are young. The bones of their faces still not quite finished, still carrying something pre-adult about the jaw or the brow, but the eyes older than anything you knew at their age. And some of them are old, men in their 40s who look 60, who look like the war has been doing something to them at a molecular level, slowly and without mercy. Some of them reach for your hand when you're near enough. You let them take it. That's not in the manual, but it's the right thing to do, and Sister Matheson does it too when she thinks no one is watching, so you don't feel like you need to justify it. The man in cot 12 is trying to tell you something. You lean in. His voice is almost nothing. A thread of air shaped into approximate words. My mate, he says. Tommy, he was right next to me. What's your name, you say. Not to redirect him, because it matters. It always matters. But because he needs to know that you're here. You're actually here. You're not just a uniform moving between cots. Caldwell, he says. James, private. Private Caldwell, I'm Nurse Morton. I'm going to look at your arm now, all right? I need you to tell me if this hurts. You already know it hurts. Everything hurts. But making him speak keeps him conscious and gives him something to focus on, other than whatever is happening to him internally, and both of those things are valuable. He tells you yes, it hurts, when you press the wound dressing on his upper left arm. Shrapnel wound, deep but clean, already dressed at the ADS, not the priority right now. What's actually concerning you is the colour of his lips, which are slightly off. Not blue enough to alarm, but not quite right either. And the way he's breathing, shallow, careful, like each breath is a deliberate decision. Have you been coughing? You ask. A bit, he says. And then, after a pause, they had the gas canisters, other side of the wire. I don't know if any of it. I had my mask on, but it was... The mask has this gap at the bottom. You are already moving away, making a note in your book, calling for an orderly. Gas. Of all the things you encounter in this war, gas is the one that still, even after 6 weeks, produces something that is not quite fear, but is the closest civilian word you have for the particular alertness that comes from knowing that the threat is already inside the patient, already in the blood, and your ability to fix it is very limited indeed. The main gas they're using now is mustard. The Germans introduced it at Ypres just weeks ago, August 1917, the 3rd time the British Army has tried to push through at Ypres. The 3rd time the ground has turned out to be more catastrophic than anyone planned, and now they've added a new element to an already catastrophic situation. Mustard gas. It doesn't kill quickly. That's the thing about it that took everyone by surprise. It blisters, it blinds, it burns from the inside. The mucous membranes, the lungs, the eyes. The men who come in gassed look wrong in a specific way, like they've been cooked slowly from within. Private Caldwell's mask had a gap. You make him a priority for Dr. Webb, who is the 2nd physician on shift and is currently doing what appears to be 3 things simultaneously at the far end of the ward. You move to cot 14. This is how the night goes. Cot by cot. Problem by problem. The notebook filling up with abbreviations that you've developed over 6 weeks. Your own shorthand system that Sister Matheson looked at once said nothing, which you've learned means approval. And the hours moving past in the way hours do when you're fully occupied. Not like the flow of time, but like the pages of a book, discrete and bounded, turning over as each patient is stabilized or transferred or assessed. By 5 in the morning, the convoy is in and sorted, and you have a ward of 279 men, which is 79 over capacity, and means that the extra cots have gone into the corridor and into the smaller receiving room, and into the section of the barn that still has a roof. You stand in the corridor for 1 minute, 60 seconds you count them, and let yourself breathe. The corridor smells of iodoform and wet stone, and something that takes you a moment to identify. Bread. Someone has started baking in the kitchen at the other end of the building. 4 in the morning and there are already fires lit because these men will need feeding, and the food here is not much, but it is reliable. Brown bread and broth, and sometimes a kind of thick porridge that the British orderlies call various things, none of which you'll repeat, and which is actually not bad when you're hungry enough. You are always hungry enough. Your stomach reminds you of this now. You ate at 9 the previous evening. A bowl of grey porridge and half a piece of bread and a cup of tea that you drank standing up, leaning against the kitchen wall, and which was the best tea you have ever had in your life purely by virtue of being hot and available. You haven't eaten since. But eating is not on the schedule for the next several hours. What's on the schedule is the pre-dawn round, going bed by bed, checking the overnight notes left by whoever did the prior check, making sure that everything noted at 1 in the morning still applies at 5. Because things change quickly in the night. A man who was stable at midnight can be in crisis at 3. You learn this in the first week and you have not forgotten it. You straighten your back. You roll your neck, one of Eleanor's suggestions to keep the muscles from seizing up, and you walk back into the ward. It is at 6:15 when you're in the supply room looking for fresh wound dressings that the cramps start. Not badly. A warning first. A low ache in your lower back that you've learned to recognize the way you recognize artillery at different distances, by quality rather than quantity. A particular kind of pressure. An announcement. You stand still for a moment in the supply room. Shelves of gauze and iodoform and rubber tubing and bandage rolls and the green-grey tins of morphine kept in a locked cabinet, for which only Sister Matheson and Dr. Hartley have the key. And you do a rapid calculation. 26 days since the last time, which means right on schedule, which is remarkable, given that Eleanor told you during your first week that most nurses here stop having regular cycles within 2 months. The body apparently makes decisions in a war zone. It decides that there are more pressing things than reproductive cycling. The body becomes efficient in its own strange way. You haven't been efficient. You are apparently going to be inconveniently regular. This is a problem. Not because of the pain. The pain is manageable. You've learned to work through it. You work through everything. But because of the practical question that follows immediately, and that question has a complicated answer. You knew this day was coming. You brought what you could from home, a collection of folded cloths, cut from an old flannel nightgown, edges hemmed by your mother with the particular competence with which your mother does everything practical, because Margaret Morton does not discuss this topic directly, but she does prepare for it. You brought 8 cloths, which seemed like enough for the transit to France. And then when you arrived, You found that the washing situation here is limited. You've been washing and reusing. The cloths are worn thin. One of them tore last month at a moment you do not think about with any degree of pleasure. Right now you're counting the situation in your head, and the answer is 2 cloths left, one of which has seen better days. You go to the locked cabinet above the sink, the one that Sister Matheson told you about on your first day, in a conversation that lasted approximately 45 seconds and covered the entire subject with the kind of brisk efficiency that suggests Sister Matheson has had this conversation 100 times and is very much not interested in expanding it. And you open it. Inside, a small collection of what the supply forms list as personal hygiene requisitions, which is the British Army's way of saying things that women need that the British Army did not originally plan to need to provide, because the British Army did not originally plan to have women, but which the British Army has now reluctantly acknowledged are necessary, because you cannot run a casualty station without nurses, and you cannot have nurses without acknowledging that nurses are human beings with bodies that have requirements. What's in the cabinet? A handful of safety pins, a folded cotton pad that has clearly been placed here by a previous nurse and may or may not be clean, and a small block of what appears to be cotton batting, cut into rough squares and wrapped in brown paper. You take the cotton batting, you take the safety pins, you work quickly in the supply room. There is no room more private than this in this building, not in this war, and you do what you can. It's uncomfortable immediately. That is the word you use in your head. Uncomfortable. Because you are not going to use a stronger word, not even in the privacy of your own thoughts. Because if you started using stronger words, you would have to start thinking harder about the number of things in your current situation that merit them, and you cannot afford that. The cotton batting is rough. It moves. It is held in place by 2 safety pins attached to your undergarments, which involves a certain amount of architectural creativity that the designers of your nurse's uniform did not anticipate. The uniform was designed, as far as you can tell, by people who believed that nurses were decorative features of a hospital, moving between patients with neat white precision, sitting carefully, standing decoratively, occasionally mopping a brow or providing a cup of broth, not bending over a stretcher for the 5th consecutive hour, not kneeling on a stone floor to check the pulse of a man who has slid half off his cot, not. You stop thinking about the uniform. There are more wound dressings on the lower shelf. You take what you need, put them in your apron pocket and go back to the ward. Dr. Hartley saves Private Haggerty's leg. You hear this from Davies at 7:30, when he's carrying breakfast trays through the receiving ward and pauses near enough to the doorway where you're standing that you can catch the news without asking for it. The leg, I mean, Davies clarifies unnecessarily. Not. Obviously the man's alive, but I mean the leg is staying on. Good, you say. This is actually a small miracle. An hour and 32 minutes with a tourniquet on an arterial wound. You did the arithmetic in your head at 2:58 and came out with an answer that suggested amputation was nearly inevitable. But Dr. Hartley is a surgeon with 6 years of experience, and 2 of them in this specific war with these specific wounds, and apparently he found something worth preserving. Davies sets down the tray he's carrying and gives you a look. Not a bad look. A considering kind of look. You've been on since 2:47, you say. That's nearly 6 hours. I know how to count, Private Davies. Sister Matheson's going to make you take a break. Sister Matheson, you say, is also going to have to get through 63 triage assessments before she takes a break, so... Davies picks up the tray. He is 20 years old, you think, though you've never asked. He has a way of carrying things that suggest he grew up carrying things. The particular economy of someone who learned early that his body was a tool and has organised his relationship to it accordingly. "There's bread left in the kitchen," he says, as he walks away. You eat the bread standing up at 8:05, leaning against the kitchen wall, the bread in one hand and your notebook open in the other, reading your own abbreviations from the night and trying to compile them into something that makes sense for the day shift arriving at 9. Eleanor appears at 8:30 with 2 cups of tea. You take one without speaking. This is one of the things you've come to value about Eleanor Price beyond anything you might have anticipated from the outside. This silence. She knows when not to talk. Growing up in a house with 2 sisters and a mother who considered silence a kind of conversational failure, you spent 22 years chronically over-talked at, and the discovery that another human being could exist companionably next to you without filling the air was something so startling that it took you 2 weeks to stop wondering what Eleanor was angry about. She's not angry. She's Sheffield. Apparently it's a regional thing. You drink the tea. You look at your notes. "How's Caldwell in 12?" Eleanor says. "Gas exposure possible. Waiting for Dr. Webb to assess the chest." Eleanor nods. She was born knowing what a nod means. Not just confirmation, but a kind of compressed acknowledgement that contains everything she's not saying because she doesn't need to say it, because you both already know it. "The one in 28, she says. "The facial burns. Burns are clean. Eyes are good. He kept the mask on properly. He'll keep his sight." "Good." She finishes her tea. You finish yours. "You've got," she starts, and then stops, and there is something careful in the pause that makes you look up from your notebook. Eleanor is looking at your uniform, at the front of your apron specifically, lower than the chest, lower than where any wound-related stain would be. You look down. Oh, the cotton batting has failed. Not dramatically. Not in the way you were worried it might, not obviously, but there is a stain on the front of your white apron. Small, already fading from dark to rust as it dries. But there, the heat in your face is immediate and thorough. Not because of what it is. You're 22 years old and a trained nurse. You have looked at things that would have destroyed your pre-nursing self, and blood in any form is not something that frightens you. It is because you are standing in a kitchen that orderlies and physicians and other nurses pass through, and because the particular thing that the stain communicates is the thing that no one at CCS 17, no one in any military or medical context apparently in any country currently at war, has any official protocol for handling. Blood from a wound is medical. Blood from a woman is something else. Something that doesn't have a form to fill out. Something that exists in a strange, unacknowledged space between the official world of the casualty station and the fact of the bodies of the women keeping it running. Eleanor doesn't look away. She also doesn't make a face. She just says, "Go change your apron." "I don't have a clean one." "I have one, in my kit. Come on." She takes your teacup without asking and puts it in the basin and walks out of the kitchen, and you follow her the way you've been following competent people since you were old enough to know what competence looks like. In the stable, Eleanor opens her trunk and hands you a clean apron with the same matter-of-fact efficiency that she hands you everything. This is one of 3 clean aprons she has. You know this because you've counted. The laundry system at CCS 17 exists, which is better than some of what you've heard about other stations. But getting something clean takes 2 days minimum, and during a heavy casualty push that timeline extends, and you are currently at the beginning of what feels like a heavy casualty push. You change. You ball up the stained apron and put it in your own laundry pile. The batting isn't working, Eleanor says. She's not looking at you. She's reorganising something in her trunk. The army kind, I mean. The cotton squares. I noticed. I've been using sphagnum. A pause. Moss. They're using it for wound dressings now because there isn't enough cotton, and it works. It's more absorbent than cotton. I got some from the supply room when the last shipment came in. You look at her. Moss, you say. It's clean. They process it. The supply officer looks at me funny every time I sign for it, but the supply officer looks at everyone funny. True. She closes her trunk. I check the back section, though. There was a shipment of something from an American company last week. Kimberly-Clark, the American supply. Cellucotton, they're calling it. Different material, not moss. I don't know what it is exactly. Davy said something about wood pulp, which sounds disgusting. But Davies also eats the army bread without complaining, so his standards are Cellucotton, you say, for wound dressings. But the way they describe it. Eleanor finally looks at you. Her expression is neutral, which you have learned means she's thinking carefully. The way they describe it, it absorbs much better than cotton gauze. Much better. And I don't know, I haven't tried it for other purposes yet, but I'm going to, when the current, she gestures vaguely at herself, when the current situation presents itself. The current situation. You're an American and a British nurse in a converted Belgian stable at 8:37 in the morning, discussing the management of menstruation in a war zone with the same oblique circumlocution that your mothers would have used, that their mothers would have used, that apparently every woman everywhere throughout recorded history has used when discussing the thing that happens to half the human race approximately every 4 weeks. The current situation. Right, you say. I'll check the supply room when I go back in. It's on the right-hand side. Bottom shelf. New shipment. Still in the crates. Another small nod. You go back to work. The supply room at CCS 17 is a long, narrow space that used to be a dairy. You can tell by the tiles, white with blue borders, and by the drainage channels in the floor that have been covered over with wooden boards. The smell of old milk is gone, replaced entirely by the chemical bouquet of the station, but the shape of the room still remembers what it was built for. The shelves line the walls on both sides, and the middle of the room has a long wooden table for unwrapping and sorting supplies. The organisation is Sister Matheson's, alphabetical within category. Not the system they taught you at St. Mary's, but one that works because the person who devised it works here 12 hours a day and can find anything in under 30 seconds. You find the crates in the back section, just where Eleanor said, Kimberly-Clark. The name is printed on the side of the wooden crate in black ink, with an American address underneath, Neenah, Wisconsin, and below that, in official medical supply stenciling, Cellucotton surgical dressings. The crate is already partially open. You lift the side further. Inside, white. Just white. Pads of material, each one wrapped individually in thin tissue paper, stacked in neat rows. You lift one out and unwrap the tissue. The material is unlike anything you have handled in 6 weeks of wound dressings. It's cotton-coloured, white, off-white, but not cotton in texture. It is lighter than cotton for its size. It is almost, you press it between your fingers, almost silky, but not slippery. More like a very fine cloth that has been compressed into density somehow. There's a slight springiness to it when you press it, like it wants to return to its shape. You notice that your fingers are slightly damp, not uncomfortably so. You'd been washing your hands before coming in here. And the material wicks the moisture away immediately, almost greedily, like it was designed to do exactly that. You stand there in the dairy that is a supply room with a pad of Cellucotton in your hand and think about Eleanor's words, the way it absorbs. You put one pad in your apron pocket, then you take out the cotton square that has been barely managing the current situation, and you look at it, and you look at the Cellucotton in your other hand, and the comparison is so immediate that you almost laugh. The cotton square is grey and rough, and has the texture of a very old tea towel. The Cellucotton is white and soft and light, and has apparently just absorbed your slightly damp fingers without being asked. You make the exchange in approximately 45 seconds, because efficiency is what you have instead of time. You return the cotton square to your pocket, because you cannot simply leave it in the supply room. You cannot leave it anywhere. The management of used materials in a casualty station requires the same invisible competence as everything else you do here, the same quiet solving of problems that don't exist on any official form, and you walk back to the ward, and you notice within the first 10 minutes of walking something so simple that it is almost embarrassing. Nothing moves. The cotton batting moved. The cotton rags moved. Every improvised solution you have used since the age of 14 has moved, has required constant small adjustments, has been a constant low-level presence in your awareness, a background noise of discomfort that you managed by pretending it wasn't there. The Cellucotton does not move. It sits where you placed it with the quiet reliability of a well-made piece of equipment, which is, you think. And this thought arrives fully formed as you check on a post-operative patient who needs his dressings changed. Exactly what it is. A piece of equipment, a material that was designed to absorb, designed to be used in exactly the conditions you are in. High demand, physical, relentless. You go through the morning's round, you change dressings, you take temperatures, you update notes, you speak to Private Caldwell about how his breathing is. Better, slightly. The gas exposure a lighter dose than feared. Dr. Webb says he should recover his full lung capacity within weeks. You sit with a man named Cooper who has lost a great deal of blood and is still uncertain in the way that recently lost blood men are uncertain. A slight disconnection from the present moment, and you talk to him about Cincinnati. Where he's from too, it turns out, the east side, Norwood, you know the neighbourhood. And the conversation seems to anchor him, which is all you were trying to do. At 11 o'clock you report to Sister Matheson for the morning briefing. Sister Matheson runs these briefings the way a military commander would run a strategy session. Quick, factual, forward-looking. She expects you to have already looked at the situation and formed an opinion, and she expects that opinion to be worth hearing. And she expects you to present it without preamble or apology. This took you 3 weeks to calibrate. The nurses you trained with at St. Mary's were not encouraged to form opinions, or rather, they were encouraged to form opinions that aligned with the physician's opinions, expressed through the physician and presented by the physician. Your own thoughts about patient care were supposed to travel upward through a series of filters until they emerged from a man's mouth as his own assessment. Sister Matheson doesn't operate that way. She's 43 years old. She's been nursing since 1897. She was in the Boer War. She has opinions on nursing that have been formed over a period of time longer than you have been alive, and one of them, apparently, is that nurses who cannot speak their minds directly are wasted. Caldwell, she says, without looking up from her board. Gas exposure mild, Dr. Webb has seen him. Prognosis for full recovery good. Haggerty. Post-op, leg preserved. Dr. Hartley's notes say he'll need monitoring for circulation over the next 72 hours. The chest in 41, waiting for theatre space, priority 2. He'll be priority 1 by noon. Push Dr. Webb on it. She looks up. How are you? Not a question. An assessment conducted with the same directness she applies to everything. Her eyes, grey, and from a face so composed that you once couldn't tell for 3 days whether she'd slept or not. Move over you once, calibrating. I'm fine, you say. When did you last eat? 8 o'clock. Bread. You'll eat properly at noon if I have to send you to the kitchen myself. Yes, sister. She looks back at her board. Then, without changing her tone, there are more Cellucotton dressings in supply. In the new crates. Make sure the day ward staff know. Better than the cotton gauze for anything with significant exudate. I'll tell them, you say. And something in you almost says something else. Almost says, I noticed that too, about the Cellucotton. I noticed something about it beyond the wound applications, but you don't. The morning is still too full. The thought is still forming, still not precise enough to say out loud. You note it for later. The afternoon brings different weather in the ward, not the frantic processing and sorting of a new convoy, but the long, slow work of maintenance, changing dressings, monitoring vitals, managing the men who are improving and the men who aren't, and the much more difficult category of men who seem stable but have an uncertain quality to them, a fragility that experienced nursing learns to detect before the charts reflect it. You are very good, you have discovered, at the uncertain ones. You don't know exactly where this skill comes from. Sister Matheson said once, during a quiet moment that surprised you both, a moment that arrived unexpectedly in the middle of an otherwise occupied afternoon, that nursing is 20% technique and 80% paying attention. The technique can be taught. The attention is either there or it isn't. You've been paying attention since you were old enough to understand that paying attention was the way to predict your mother's moods, your father's silences, the shifting social weather of a family of 5 in a brick house in Ohio. You've been cataloguing the subtle variations in faces and breath and movement since before you knew you were doing it. In a war ward in Belgium, this turns out to be directly useful in a way that all those years of household attention were not. You notice at 2 in the afternoon that Private Doyle in Cot 33 has changed. Doyle came in with the convoy. Shrapnel wounds to the left shoulder and upper arm. Significant blood loss, but stable when he arrived. He's 32. He's from Galway. He has a way of being quiet that is different from the quiet of the men who are unconscious or delirious. It's a chosen quiet, a deliberate stillness. But the stillness now is different. You check his pulse. Fast. Too fast for a man who's been lying still for 6 hours. You check his forehead. Warm. Definitely warmer than this morning. You lift the dressing on his shoulder. The wound has changed colour. You call for Dr. Webb. You do this calmly, in the voice you have developed over 6 weeks that communicates urgency without panic. That says, this needs attention now, and I have already determined that, and I need you to confirm. Dr. Webb comes. He looks. He asks you 3 questions. You answer them, and then he sends you for specific supplies. Fresh iodine, new packing, a particular grade of gauze. Good catch, he says when you come back. This is not the effusive praise of a supervisor who believes in effusive praise. Dr. Webb is a spare man in every sense. Spare of body, spare of words, spare of emotion. Good catch from Dr. Webb means what a more demonstrative man might express over a full sentence with an adjective. You take it. You go back to work. The evening comes the way evenings come at the end of a convoy push. Gradually, and then all at once. The ward thickens with the particular quality of nightfall, the light changing, the sounds changing, the men who've been awake all day finally losing their grip on consciousness, the ones who've been unconscious achieving something that looks like sleep if you don't look too closely. You're supposed to be off at 6. Day shift to evening shift to night shift. That's the official structure, which means that your day shift, which started at 2:47 in the morning, officially ends at some theoretical 6 o'clock. That does not account for the fact that when 60 men arrive in the middle of the night, the work does not end because the work does not end. At 6:30, Sister Matheson appears at your shoulder and says, "Go." I haven't finished the "go." 6 hours tonight I'll need you back. Davies will finish the notes. Private Davies can't. Nurse Barnes is staying over. She'll supervise Davies. Go. There's no arguing with Sister Matheson when she uses the word "go" in that tone. The word sounds like a period at the end of a very long sentence. You go. Outside, the evening air is the most startling thing. After 16 hours inside, 16 hours of carbolic and iodoform and the warm weight of human suffering, the outside air is so clean it's almost aggressive. You stand in the farmyard and breathe like you've forgotten how to do it. The light is going. Summer evening, but cloudy. The clouds low and moving, and to the northeast, where the line is, there's a particular quality to the horizon that might be weather and might not be. A yellowish tinge along the tree line. You've learned the difference between natural and unnatural light on the horizon, but this one is ambiguous. You walk. There is nowhere to walk to. You're 2 miles outside a small Belgian town that has been half ruined for 3 years. But you walk anyway because your body needs to remember that it can move without purpose, without a patient at the end of the movement. The road is mud and stone. Your boots are serviceable. Army issue, specifically designed for the conditions. One of the things the army actually got right. You walk north along the road until the farm buildings are behind you and the field opens up on your left, and then you stop. The field has been a field once. You can tell by the slight regularity of it. The way the ground under the weeds and the mud has a deliberate flatness that nature doesn't make. A crop field, wheat maybe, or flax. Something that needed flat, regular earth and careful tending. It hasn't been that for a while. The shell holes start about 200 yards from the road, small ones mostly. Not the big German artillery, just the ordinary ongoing percussion of a landscape that has been living too close to a war for too long. The holes are full of water, grey-brown, reflecting the grey-brown sky. You sit down on a piece of broken stone wall that once marked the field's edge. Your body starts reporting in now that you've stopped moving. Your feet ache with the specific bone-deep ache of 16 consecutive hours on stone floors. Your lower back has that conversation you knew it was going to have. Your hands are raw from washing. The soap at CCS 17 is strong because it needs to be, and you wash your hands between every patient, every procedure, every contact that could transfer infection, which means you wash your hands approximately 40 times a day, and the skin on your knuckles has cracked in 2 places. You're wearing your hands like gloves that are slightly too tight, and the thing you've been not thinking about all day is still there. The Cellucotton's still doing its quiet, efficient job, and you realise that this is the first time since the age of 14 that you've gone 12 consecutive hours without consciously managing this particular situation, without adjusting, checking, being aware of it, without the background noise. 12 hours, not noticing. That is genuinely remarkable. You sit on the broken wall and look at the shell-holed field and think about this. 12 hours. And a material that was designed for wounds. That was designed to manage exactly what wounds manage. Fluid, the evidence of the body's ongoing processes, repurposed, because repurposing is what people do when they have a problem and a material that solves it, and no official channel for making the connection. You think about the women at this station, 17 nurses currently on rotating shifts, plus the women at the YMCA canteen a mile up the road, plus the French women from the village, 3 of them who come in 3 days a week to help with laundry and cooking, because without them the station couldn't function at current capacity, but who are not official staff, who don't appear on any form. All of these women, all of them with the same situation, the same recurring problem, the same inadequate improvised solutions that have been improvised for centuries because the alternative, acknowledging the problem clearly enough to solve it, has always seemed more impossible than the ongoing improvisation. And sitting in the supply room, an entire crate of something unambiguously better. You pick up a piece of stone from the broken wall and turn it in your raw fingers. It's flint, flat, grey, cold. The field behind you is quiet except for the distant artillery and the closer sound of birds finding their evening roosts. There you are. You look up. Eleanor. She's walking across the farmyard toward you, still in her uniform but with her cap off. Her dark hair pinned up but less precisely than during the shift, a few pieces escaping at the temples. She looks like someone who has also been on her feet for 16 hours but is managing it with better posture than you. She stops next to the broken wall and looks at the field. "How was the Cellucotton?" she says. Not a question. "Better," you say. "How much better?" You think about how to quantify this. 12 hours, you say. "I didn't think about it once in 12 hours. You stop. That's not normal." Eleanor is quiet for a moment. The artillery to the northeast does something rhythmic and distant. A bird somewhere in the broken stone makes a sound you don't recognize. "I've been thinking," she says, and her voice has a quality you haven't heard before. Careful, almost tentative, which is so unlike Eleanor that it catches your attention the way a held note in a piece of music catches your attention. About what this would mean if someone could sell these commercially. She says the word the way you might say a word you've been testing in your mouth for a while, checking its weight. The dressings, you say. Something like the dressings made for... She stops. "You know what I mean?" "I know what you mean." "Commercially," she says again. "Properly made. Not surgical dressings, but the same material. The same... What did Davy say it was? Wood pulp. They process wood pulp somehow. Make it into something like cotton, but lighter, more absorbent. Wood pulp. She considers this. Sounds disgusting. The cotton batting we've been using is made from plant fibres. This is the same basic category. Yes, but wood sounds more. Agricultural. A slight pause. Eleanor almost smiles. Agricultural. Yes. You both look at the field for a moment. The shell holes catching the last light. "Nobody sells anything like it," you say. "Not commercially. Everything is homemade or improvised, or the kind of thing you find in a medical cabinet that's been put there by someone who didn't know how to ask for something specific. Every woman I know has a box of rags that she washes and reuses and doesn't discuss with anyone," Eleanor says. "My mother, my sisters, the women at home. My mother made me a set before I left. Flannel. Very neat hemming. Mine too." A pause. "This is better than flannel," you say. "Yes." "This is significantly better than anything." "Yes." You sit with that for a moment. The broken field, the artillery, the evening light going. Someone should tell someone, you say. Eleanor looks at you. Her expression is the one that means she's been thinking exactly this and has been waiting to see if you would say it. Yes, she says. Someone with the ability to do something about it. Someone like Kimberly Clark, she says. The name on the crate. You think about this. A company in Neenah, Wisconsin, wherever Neenah is, making wound dressings for the Allied war effort. The material arriving in wooden crates stamped with black ink. Nurses in Belgium discovering one, by way of quiet conversations in empty stable yards in the evening, that the material is better than anything they have for a purpose nobody official will acknowledge. It would need advertising, you say, because you can't talk about it directly. Nobody talks about it directly. It would have to be implied. The advertising would have to imply without saying. Eleanor nods slowly. Like how patent medicine companies advertise for female complaints, the language they use. Exactly. Suggesting the shape of the solution without drawing the shape. You sit on the broken wall in the Belgian evening and work through this problem together, and it is the most significant conversation you've had in 6 weeks, and nobody at CCS 17 will ever know it happened. 3 days later, the gas comes to you. Not in the slow trickle of individual casualties that you've been processing, men with varying degrees of exposure who came through the ADS and were assessed and prioritised and sent along the chain. This is different. This is a wave. The first hint is a telephone call at 4 a.m. that you're not supposed to hear, but that carries through the thin walls of the farmhouse when everything else is quiet. You're in the corridor outside the operating theatre, not because you have business there at 4 a.m, but because the man in the corridor outside needs checking, and the corridor is adjacent to the room where the telephone lives. The voice you can hear is Sister Matheson's. How many? A pause. How many confirmed? A longer pause. We don't have the beds. She says this flatly, like stating a meteorological fact. No, I understand. Yes, we'll manage. She puts the telephone down. She comes into the corridor and looks at you with the specific look that means, you heard that. Gas attack, she says. Near Langemark. They're saying mustard, possibly some phosgene as well. The ADS is overwhelmed. They're sending us the overflow. Langemark is about 12 miles away. How many overflow, you ask? Unknown. Possibly 100. 100 men with gas exposure. What's our current capacity, you say, even though you know the answer? Theoretical 200, actual 241. She's already walking, already moving toward the ward. Wake Price and Farrell. Leave Lawrence and Kaminsky to sleep. They'll need to be fresh for the afternoon. I'll contact Dr. Hartley. A medical supply tent as a ward for 100 gas casualties. You catalogue the problems with this in the time it takes you to walk from the corridor to the stable. No proper beds, no access to the operating theatre, no drainage, lighting limited to emergency lanterns, temperature in August ranging from cold before dawn to oven hot by 10. You wake Eleanor, you wake Bridget. You do not have to explain. You've all been here long enough that the specific way you enter the stable before dawn says everything. They're on their feet before you finish speaking. The casualties start arriving at 5:15. You're ready, or as ready as it's possible to be for 100 men who've been poisoned by a chemical that attacks every mucous membrane and soft tissue it contacts. Mustard gas is not a gas, technically. It's an aerosol, liquid, heavier than air, settling onto everything. Clothing, skin, eyes. Smells like garlic, or like mustard, or like a very strange kind of cellar. The men who describe it later use different words, but all of them have that particular note, that sulphurous organic quality. And it doesn't kill quickly, it blinds first. The eyes swell shut within hours of exposure. It blisters the skin, huge fluid-filled blisters that form over the next day and burst and become wounds. It burns the throat and the lungs, and the treatment is... There isn't a treatment, not exactly. There is cleaning, and there is managing symptoms, and there is keeping the man alive while his body tries to cope with what has been done to it. The first cart arrives with 8 men. You can hear them before you see them, not screaming, the opposite of screaming. A particular kind of quiet that is worse than screaming, because screaming means energy, means the body still fighting, whereas this quiet is the sound of men who are trying very hard not to inhale too deeply, who are rationing their breath because each full breath hurts. The eyes are the first thing you see when you open the cart flaps. All 8 men have wet cloths over their faces, not over their wounds, over their faces, because the eyes are already affected, already swelling, and the light, even the grey pre-dawn light, is agony. You have practiced being calm. You have practiced it the way you practice surgical technique in nursing school, repetitively, until the practice became habit, until the habit became reflex. You call upon this reflex now. Names, you say to the orderly who came with the cart. He reads from his tags. You write in your notebook. Private Lynch, Private O'Brien, Private Swinton. Get the cloths off their eyes, you say. Careful, don't pull. They said to keep. The cloths need to come off, they need washing and then fresh wet cloths. We need to see the eyes. The orderly, a different one from the ADS presumably, looks at you with a particular expression that men who are new to you sometimes have. The expression that tries to calculate whether someone your age, in your uniform, has the authority they're projecting. You meet his gaze and say nothing and wait. He begins to remove the cloths. This is not technically within your nursing brief. What you're about to do is assess gas casualties and triage them, and provide initial treatment, none of which is legally within your purview, because your purview is defined as assisting medical officers and implementing their directives. But Dr. Hartley and Dr. Webb, and the 2 additional physicians who've just arrived from the base hospital, are currently occupied with the men who came in 20 minutes ago. And these 8 men are here now, and whatever authority you're not supposed to have is considerably less important than what needs to happen in the next 10 minutes. The eyes of the first man, Lynch Patrick Private, are red, not just bloodshot, red in the specific all-over way of mustard gas exposure, the entire eye inflamed, the lids puffing and threatening to close. He's blinking rapidly, involuntarily. Each blink is clearly painful. "Can you see me?" you ask. "I can. Yes. Sorta. Everything's bright." "I know. This is going to help." You take a prepared wash, sodium bicarbonate solution, which isn't perfect but is what you have for eyes, and you begin to flush his eyes gently, carefully, the way you were taught, slowly enough to not cause more pain than it prevents. Private Lynch makes a sound that is not quite crying. His hands come up reflexively and you catch them. "Hold still," you say. "I know. Hold still." He holds still. This is what you do for the next 3 hours. You and Eleanor and Bridget working in the supply tent under 2 lanterns and the growing morning light coming through canvas. The smell of mustard gas present. Not strongly, not dangerously at your distance, but present, clinging to the men's clothing, rising faintly in the warming air. Davies cuts uniforms off the men who still have their uniforms. The gas soaks into fabric and continues to cause damage as long as the fabric is in contact with skin. The uniforms go into a pile outside the tent that nobody goes near. Bridget is in the far corner working through the eye washings with a systematic efficiency that has reduced her to nothing but hands and movement. Hands and movement. She's praying. You can tell by her lips, but her hands are absolutely steady. Eleanor is managing the most critical case, a man named Bartholomew who is the worst you've seen this morning, the exposure heaviest, the blistering already advanced enough on his throat that his airway is a real and immediate concern. You are doing everything else. Everything else is approximately 37 different tasks occurring simultaneously in a tent the size of a large drawing room, lit by 2 lanterns and God's grace, with 2 nursing staff and 3 orderlies, and no physician currently present because all 4 physicians are in the operating theatre. There is no time in this stretch of hours. Time is something that exists outside the tent. Inside the tent there is only the next thing, the next assessment, the next wash, the next man, whose eyes you have to open and look at and tell him honestly, or not honestly, whether what you see is what you need to see. You develop a shorthand with Davies that would make Sister Mathison proud. 4 words maximum, eyes worse, move up. Breathing clear, good, this one. Hartley, soon. Davies is not supposed to be making medical decisions, but he's relaying information from you to the physicians the way a switchboard operator relays calls, efficiently and without interpretation, and it works. Imperfectly, but it works. At 10:30, one of the men dies. His name is Private Arthur Swinton from Wolverhampton. He is 19 years old. The gas exposure was too deep, too long before treatment. His lungs, the wet sound of his breathing has been getting worse since he arrived. The kind of wet sound that means fluid, that means the gas has burned deep enough to trigger a flooding response. Give out between 10:23 and 10:30, quietly without drama, the way that almost all deaths in hospital are quiet and without drama compared to how they are in the stories. You were holding his hand when it happened, not because of any medical reason, because he was scared and couldn't see and kept saying, "Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," and you couldn't figure out what he was sorry about, whether he was delirious or apologizing to someone specific, or just doing what people sometimes do when they're very frightened and very young, which is to assume that whatever is happening to them must somehow be their fault. You sat with him. You held his hand. His grip was very strong, and then it wasn't. You note the time in your book. You close it again. You move to the next case. This is the work. This is all of it. At 1 o'clock, Sister Mathison comes into the tent and looks at everything and says nothing for a full 30 seconds, taking inventory, rapid, professional, and then she says to you, "Go eat." "I can't. The tent is managed. Bridget is here. Davies has his orders. Go eat. Come back in 45 minutes. There's a quality to her voice that tells you the 45 minutes is not negotiable. You walk to the kitchen. You eat brown bread again and a piece of cheese and tea that is stewed almost to bitterness but hot. And you don't sit, because if you sit you'll be asleep before the bread is finished. Your hands don't stop shaking until the second cup of tea. You look at your hands while you drink. They're raw. The carbolic soap has opened the existing cracks further. There are 4 now on your knuckles, and the sodium bicarbonate solution you've been using for the eye washings has an astringent quality that hasn't helped. Your fingers feel like they've been wrapped in something a size too small, but they're steady now. The shaking stopped somewhere in the second cup. Outside the kitchen window, the farmyard has the look of managed chaos. Ambulances and carts are still arriving. More slowly now, the initial wave absorbed, and orderlies are moving between them with stretchers, and everything is exactly as purposeful as it needs to be and no more. You look at your hands. You look at the tent visible through the window, the canvas sides beginning to glow as the sun climbs. You think about Private Swinton. You are 22 years old and you have watched someone die while holding their hand, and your 45 minutes of break is passing and you need to be back in that tent in 38 minutes. You drink your tea, you breathe, you go back. The afternoon is a kind of ongoing negotiation between what is needed and what is possible, which is, you have learned, the fundamental condition of nursing in a war zone and possibly nursing anywhere, possibly medicine anywhere, possibly life anywhere, and the only productive response to it is to prioritize clearly and keep moving. The gas casualties stabilize mostly. 2 more require physician intervention. Dr. Hartley spends 2 hours in the tent between surgical cases, and his presence changes the quality of the tent somehow, makes things sharper, even though what he's doing in practical terms is not dramatically different from what you and Bridget have been doing. But he looks like a physician, and the men respond to that. You notice this. You file it. At 4 in the afternoon, Eleanor finds you in the supply room. You're restocking. Dressings and gauze and a fresh supply of sodium bicarbonate for the eye washings. And you've just opened a new crate of Cellucotton, and you're transferring pads from the crate to the supply shelf when Eleanor comes in and stops. She looks at the Cellucotton in your hands. How many did we use today, she says. You look at the crate. Count what's been taken. 14, you say. Eye compresses mostly. The bicarbonate solution soaks through cotton gauze too quickly. The Cellucotton holds it. Yes. Eleanor leans against the door frame. She looks like what she is. Someone who has been working for 12 consecutive hours. I used it for an eye compress on Bartholomew and it lasted 4 times longer than the gauze would have. Because it absorbs, you say. 4 times longer. I timed it. She pauses. I found myself thinking about the morning, she says. And then she stops, and the stop is deliberate, and she looks at you. You look back. You're both standing in the dairy supply room at 4 in the afternoon, on a day that has contained more than a day's worth of things, and you're both thinking about the same thing without saying it, which is the thing you talked about 3 days ago on the broken wall. The bicarbonate holds in it, you say. But that's not the main property. The main property is the absorption rate. You turn the pad in your hands. It pulls liquid in and holds it rather than allowing it to spread and wick to the surface. Which is what you want for a wound dressing, Eleanor says, and other applications. And other applications, she confirms. The word hangs in the supply room between you. Other applications. Someone needs to write it down, Eleanor says. Not just a conversation. Actual writing. Who makes this? Why it works? What it could be used for? The properties. You could describe the properties without describing. Without saying what you mean. Without saying what you mean, she confirms. You put the Cellucotton pad down on the shelf. You look at it. The supply officer has the manufacturer's information, you say. He does. Kimberly Clark. You remember the address on the crate. Neenah, Wisconsin. Someone there knows what they've made, Eleanor says. They know the properties. They may not have thought about other applications. Other applications? She pushes off from the doorframe. Think about it, she says, for when there's time. She leaves. You stand in the supply room for a moment longer, in the presence of the crate of white pads and the smell of carbolic acid and the distant sound of artillery, and you think about time. There isn't any, and there won't be any, not for as long as this war lasts. But Eleanor said, for when there's time. and Eleanor says exactly what she means. In the days after the gas convoy, the ward reorganises itself into the post-emergency rhythm. Steadier, still demanding, but with the quality of maintenance rather than crisis. The barn tent becomes a secondary ward more permanently. Sister Matheson communicates this in her characteristic way. One sentence, no discussion, and then it's done. You take the morning shift in the tent 3 days a week. The tent has qualities that the main ward doesn't. The light is different, canvas filtered, softer, a kind of uniform amber in the morning and dusty gold in the afternoon. The men in the tent tend to talk more. You've thought about why and concluded it's the acoustics, the canvas muffling the ambient noise of the station, creating an oddly intimate space, and possibly the light, which is kinder than electric bulbs to men whose eyes are still sensitive from gas exposure. Or possibly they talk more because in the tent there are fewer reminders of exactly where they are, and so they have slightly more room to be people rather than patients. Private Lynch, Patrick, from Derry, 19 years old, gas exposure bilateral eyes improving, tells you about his family on the third morning after the convoy. He can see well enough now to track your movement. The redness is clearing, slowly. He's propped up on his cot, watching you take the temperature of the man in the adjacent cot, and when you come to his cot he doesn't wait for you to ask. 5 brothers, he says. I'm the second. My mother has been writing me letters since September 1915 that each one is the last, that she'll die of the worry, and she hasn't died of anything. Mothers are usually more resilient than they claim, you say, writing down his temperature. She sent me socks every 3 weeks since I left. I have 15 pairs. I have given away 11 pairs because I can only wear 2 at a time. Has she run out of wool? She knits faster than she runs out of wool. He pauses. The doctors say the hands need to be occupied, don't they? When someone is anxious, the hands need something to do. It helps some people. It helps her. He looks at you with the eyes that are returning to their normal brown, still slightly swollen but recognisably individual again. What do your hands need? It's a startling question. Patients don't usually ask you about yourself. You've cultivated a professional smoothness that reflects questions back, redirects, keeps the attention on the patient. But Private Lynch is asking with genuine curiosity rather than social obligation, and something in the question reaches past the smoothness. Work, you say, honestly. My hands need something to do, he nods, considering this. Like my mother. Like your mother. Yes. He's quiet for a moment. Then, the nurse who was here before you, the dark-haired one, Nurse Price. She was telling me about some kind of dressing material. She said it was American. You go very still, very slightly. She was talking to Bartholomew, he says, about his bandages. She was saying something about how the material works differently. Cellucotton, you say. Yes, it's a new material. Wood pulp fibre, processed into something like cotton but with better absorption. Kimberly-Clark makes it. Better than cotton? For absorption, significantly. Private Lynch looks at his arm, the eye that's looking better, the brow beginning to unswell. She said she wished they had it for other things. Not just wounds. She seemed to think it was an important thing, in a way she wasn't saying. You look at him. He looks at you. I'm 19, he says. I have 4 sisters. I've spent my whole life noticing the things women aren't saying. Something in you. Something that has been wound tight since the gas convoy, since the morning with the stained apron, since the conversation on the broken wall releases slightly. It's a very absorbent material, you say carefully. That's its primary property, and it's soft, much softer than cotton gauze, and it stays where I put it. It maintains its structure when wet. You pause. These are properties useful in many medical contexts. Private Lynch nods slowly. And outside medical contexts, he says very quietly. And outside medical contexts, you confirm. You both look at the tent wall for a moment, the canvas shifting slightly in the breeze. Someone should do something about that, he says. Someone should, you agree. You move to the next cot. September comes with rain. Belgium in September, you've been told by everyone who spent a September here before you, is when the weather becomes its own kind of adversary. The Flanders mud, which had been managed to something like navigability during the drier summer weeks, becomes itself again. The roads flood, the fields flood, the shell holes fill and overflow, and the water has nowhere to go because the drainage systems that used to manage this landscape were part of the infrastructure that the first 6 months of war destroyed, and nobody has had the resources to rebuild. The ambulance carts take 40 minutes longer than usual. The horses lose shoes in the mud. The orderlies lose boots. You develop a new morning routine that starts not with the ward, but with a 5-minute standing at the supply room window, looking at the sky, assessing, planning for how the day's transportation will be affected by the weather, which affects how many casualties you'll receive and when, and in what condition. Not because you're a transportation planner, but because nursing in a war zone is the art of anticipating every adjacent problem. Sister Matheson notices you doing this on the 3rd morning. She says nothing. 2 days later, she starts doing it too. This is Sister Matheson's version of a compliment. The gas casualties from August are slowly being transferred to the base hospitals. Private Lynch leaves in the 2nd week of September. He shakes your hand when he goes and then, surprising you, shakes it again and holds it. Write someone, he says, about the material. Write someone. We will, you say. We, because Eleanor is standing 2 feet away watching the transfer, and you've decided you are not going to be the kind of person who speaks for another person without acknowledging them. Eleanor nods at Private Lynch, a very small nod. He gets into the transport cart. He waves from the back and then the cart moves off down the mud-heavy road, and you watch it until it rounds the bend. Then you go back to work. You write the letter in October. Not on impulse. It's been building since August. The idea taking shape through conversations with Eleanor and Bridget, and through the ongoing evidence of the supply room, where the Cellucotton continues to arrive in crates and continues to be used for wound dressings and eye compresses and quietly for other applications that don't appear on any supply form. You write it on a Saturday evening in the stable, by candlelight, on the back of an old nursing school correspondence form because proper writing paper is in short supply, and you're not going to waste the station's official letterhead. You write to the nursing division of the American Red Cross, care of the Paris office. You do not write to Kimberly-Clark directly. That felt too presumptuous. You're a nurse in Belgium. They're a manufacturing company in Wisconsin. The leap from one to the other requires an intermediary, a legitimizing frame. The Red Cross is the frame. You write, to whom it may concern, I am writing from Casualty Clearing Station 17, Belgium, where I've been serving as a staff nurse since August of this year. In the course of our medical supply allocations, our station has been receiving a material called Cellucotton from the Kimberly-Clark Corporation, Neenah, Wisconsin, for use as surgical dressings. I wish to draw your attention to certain properties of this material that may be of interest beyond its current application. You stop. You look at the candle. You think about how to say what you want to say. Eleanor is sitting on her cot reading a letter from home. Bridget is asleep. She had the early shift. And Nurse Lawrence has gone to the YMCA canteen up the road, and Kaminsky is on night duty. It's just you and Eleanor and the candle. The property in question, you say aloud. Eleanor looks up. What do I call it, you say? Without saying what I mean. You're writing the letter. I'm at the property part. Eleanor puts down her letter. She thinks. Its absorption properties are superior to any cotton product currently available, she says, in conditions that include sustained physical contact with bodily fluids. Sustained physical contact with bodily fluids, you repeat. It's medical language. It describes what it does without saying what it does. You write it down. Your handwriting is very neat. Another thing your mother gave you, along with the hemmed flannel cloths and the competence. And the sentence looks reasonable on the page. Professional. Additionally, Eleanor says, you might note that the material maintains its structural integrity when wet, which cotton products do not. That it is comfortable against delicate tissue. Delicate tissue, as you say. Yes, you write this. Then, these properties suggest that the material could be developed for commercial distribution as a personal hygiene product for women with appropriate modification for civilian use. You stop again. Is that too direct, you say. Eleanor reads over your shoulder. She's quiet for a moment. It's exactly direct enough, she says. Not a single word that says what you mean, and absolutely no ambiguity about what you mean. Good. You finish the letter. You sign it. Agnes Morton, staff nurse. CCS 17, American Red Cross. You add the date. You fold it. You put it in an envelope. You address it to the Paris office. In the morning you give it to Davies to go out with the regular mail. It is not the last letter you will write. It is the first. November brings two things. One is the cold. The cold at CCS 17 in November is something you weren't entirely prepared for, despite the warnings. It's not the cold of Ohio winters, dry and sharp and clear, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible and stings your cheeks, but is essentially honest about what it is. This cold is wet. It comes from all directions simultaneously. The stone walls of the farmhouse absorb it and release it back into the ward at night. The ground in the farmyard freezes and then thaws in a cycle that makes the mud uniquely treacherous. A smooth frozen surface that gives way without warning to the grey-brown depth underneath. You keep an extra pair of socks in your apron pocket, which you swap out mid-shift because wet feet become cold feet, become numb feet, become a nursing liability. This is Sister Matheson's suggestion, delivered in October as a single instruction that she has clearly given before. Extra socks. Pocket. Change at noon. That's it. The second thing November brings is a change in the character of what arrives. The battle at Passchendaele, as everyone is starting to call it, after the ruined village at the far edge of the ridgeline, ends in November in the technical military sense. The British Army reaches a point where advancing further is impossible and the decision is made to stop. What ends looks like, from CCS 17, is a gradual decrease in convoy volume, followed by a shift in the quality of what comes in. The acute cases decrease. What increases is the category of men who have been carrying wounds for longer than they should have been. Men who were wounded 2 weeks ago at an ADS that was too overwhelmed to transfer them. Men whose wounds have been managed but not treated. maintained but not healed, held together by field medicine that was never meant to be the endpoint. These cases are more complex. They require a different kind of attention, not the rapid assessment and triage of a convoy push, but a patient iterative approach. Daily dressings, daily assessment of healing progress, the slow negotiation between infection and the body's attempts to repair itself. You develop a particular competence with these cases. Sister Matheson begins assigning you the most complex dressings. This is, you come to understand, actually a more demanding assignment. The urgent ones require speed and decision, which are skills you have, but the complex ones require the other thing, the thing Sister Matheson identified when she said, "Looking at you one afternoon, you see what isn't there yet. What isn't there yet? The trajectory of a wound, not just its current state. The way something will look in 48 hours based on how it looks today. This is, you think, what your mother was teaching you all along. Not just competence, anticipation." There is a man named Sergeant James Cullen who arrives in November with a wound to his right hand. He's 38 years old, older than most, and he is, among other things, a typesetter. He tells you this on the third day of his stay, when his temperature has come down enough for him to be interested in conversation. "I work for a newspaper in Edinburgh," he says. "Set the type by hand." He looks at the bandaged hand with an expression you've seen before. Someone calculating the odds of returning to what they know. "I suppose I still will, if the fingers..." "The index finger should heal fully, you say." The ring finger is the one you're less certain about. The damage is deeper, into the joint. The other, "We'll see how the next 2 weeks go." He looks at you. He's a steady-eyed man, a reader of faces, the way someone who spent years arranging words into order becomes a reader of what's underneath them. "Honest," he says. "I appreciate that. I try to be. Not everyone is." He says this without bitterness. The young ones, they tell the men what will help them sleep. "And other times, you say, a man needs to know the actual situation so he can plan for it." "Exactly." He looks at the bandaged hand again. "I've been watching what you do with the dressings, the material you use. Different materials for different wounds, you say. The white one, the soft one. Cellucotton. It's different from the others." He pauses. "It absorbs. But more than that, it absorbs and holds. The surface in contact stays manageable." You look at him. "You've been paying attention." "I worked for a newspaper for 15 years. Paying attention is..." He almost smiles. "It's what you do." "The description is accurate, you say. The fluid is managed internally, within the material structure, which means the surface in contact with tissue remains manageable," he says. "Yes, manageable. That would have other uses," he says, not a question. You look at the tent ceiling for a moment, the canvas, the morning light coming through. "It would," you say. "Yes." Has anyone written about this? The letter in October, gone to Paris. No response yet. "Someone has written," you say. He nods. He looks at his bandaged hand. Then the index finger of his unbandaged left hand tapping once on the cot. A typesetter's habit. The muscle memory of someone who has spent years placing letters precisely. The newspaper business runs on information that people need and don't have yet. When that information becomes available, someone always finds a way to distribute it. He pauses. The product has to exist, and then it has to be named and described and told to people in a way that makes them understand what they need. Even if you can't say exactly what it is, you say, especially then, he says, The most important things are often the things that don't have a clean word for them yet. You think about this for several days afterward. The most important things are often the things that don't have a clean word for them yet. The problem with Cellucotton, for the purpose you and Eleanor have been discussing, is exactly this. The purpose doesn't have a clean word. It has the language women have used for centuries. Rags, clouts, the monthly necessity, the time. All of which are either too informal or too medical, or too negative or too vague to anchor a commercial product. What you need is a name, a clean name, a neutral name that describes the function without describing the function. You think about this while changing dressings. You think about it during the overnight round, the lantern in your hand, moving bed by bed through the main ward. You think about it in the 5-minute morning window at the supply room window. In December, the reply comes from Paris. It arrives as part of the weekly mail pouch. One envelope addressed directly to you, from the American Red Cross Paris office, Department of Nursing Welfare. You open it in the kitchen. Eleanor is there. The letter is from a Miss Harriet Edmonds, Assistant Director of Nursing Supplies. It is 3 paragraphs. The first acknowledges receipt of your communication. The second summarizes your observations about Cellucotton in terms that are careful and professional, and manage to discuss the entire subject without using a single word that your mother would require you to explain. The third paragraph says, "We have forwarded your observations to the Kimberly-Clark Corporation through our supply liaison. It is our understanding that representatives of this company have been investigating potential post-war commercial applications of their Cellucotton material, and your observations may be of direct relevance to this investigation. Post-war commercial applications." Eleanor reads it over your shoulder. She's quiet for a moment. "They're already thinking about it," she says. "Someone is. Which means they need to hear this from someone who knows. They've heard it. They need to hear it from more people," you say. "It needs more than one letter from one nurse in Belgium." Eleanor looks at the letter, then at you. "I'll write one," she says, "from Sheffield when I'm home." "And I'll find other nurses," you say, "because there are nurses all over France who've discovered the same thing." "There are nurses in England," Eleanor says, "and Scotland, and the base hospitals." "There are a lot of us," you say. "There have always been a lot of us," Eleanor says. "The counting is what's different." She hands the letter back. You fold it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of your uniform jacket against your chest. Christmas comes. It comes with a tree that Davies procures from somewhere. Nobody asks. And with a parcel from your mother that contains socks, fruitcake in a tin that has survived the Atlantic and the transport chain, and arrived only slightly compressed, and a letter of 18 pages covering everything from the neighbourhood news to your youngest sister's school recital to the price of beef, and the particular quality of your mother's worry about you, which your mother expresses by spending 17 of the 18 pages not mentioning that she's worried. The 18th page says, "I hope you are safe and sleeping and not working too hard," which I know is not a thing you will do. You have never done it. You always work exactly as hard as the situation requires and then harder. And I am proud of you every day. You read this in the kitchen. You are not crying. The stewed tea is extremely hot. Sister Matheson serves Christmas dinner in the ward, which she does by walking through with a kind of controlled ceremony that manages to be both efficient and genuinely warm. She says something personal to every conscious man, something specific that requires her to have been paying attention to each of them as an individual. You watch this and think about what it costs. The effort of knowing 208 men well enough to say something specific, the invisibility of that effort. In the evening, Kaminsky plays a harmonica. She's had it the whole time, she says. When everyone stares, she just didn't have an occasion. And plays carols while the men who can sing, sing, and the men who can't listen. And Sister Matheson sits at the edge of the ward with an expression that means she's thinking about somewhere else, someone else. You sit beside her. You don't say anything. Neither does she. The harmonica plays Silent Night. Kaminsky plays it in 3 languages, English, German, Polish, without pausing between them. The melody, the same regardless. The artillery is quiet tonight. Probably not for that reason, but quiet. January and February are the coldest months in memory. Several of the older orderlies say this, and they have previous years to compare to. The ward's pipes freeze twice. You develop a cold in January that lasts 3 weeks, and that Sister Matheson manages by making you drink an extra cup of broth at every meal, and refusing to assign you to the tent ward because the tent ward is colder and you are already coughing. You spend the 3 weeks in the main ward and do not mention that you are not entirely fine. Eleanor develops her own cold 2 weeks into yours. She treats it with the same philosophy she treats everything. Acknowledge, manage, continue. She coughs with great discretion, always away from patients, always into her handkerchief. She does not slow down. You both recover. In February, the first responses to the Red Cross circular begin to arrive at Paris, routed through to the station in the mail pouch. Not from Kimberly Clark, not directly, but from nursing coordinators in 3 different base hospitals who've each received a circular from the Paris office about the supply properties of Cellucotton, and who are writing back with their own observations. Most of them don't say what they are observing directly. The language is careful, professional, layered with medical terminology that functions as a kind of code. But the observations are consistent. The material absorbs more effectively than alternatives currently available. The material is more comfortable for extended contact. The material would benefit from commercial development for non-medical applications. Non-medical applications. You read these letters in the kitchen, over stewed tea, and you feel something that takes you a moment to identify. The feeling of not being alone in something. The feeling that the thing you noticed in the supply room in August has been noticed by other women in other supply rooms in other hospital stations across France and Belgium and England, and that all of them noticed it independently, and that the fact of independent convergent discovery means it is more true than any single observation. You write back to all 3 nursing coordinators. You describe the properties of the material in the language of nursing supply assessment. You note the potential for commercial application. You suggest that coordinated communication to the manufacturer might be more effective than individual correspondence. You are, without quite naming it, organizing. March brings the German spring offensive. The sound reaches CCS 17 as a continuous low roar different in character from anything previous. Not the intermittent percussion of ongoing battle, but something sustained. Almost geological, the sound of the earth being reorganized. The offensive is pushing south of you, but the reverberations ripple through everything. The supply chains, the staffing allocations, the quality and quantity of what arrives. CCS 17 is not in the direct path, but everything tightens, everything gets harder. The Cellucotton supply becomes less reliable. The crates arrive sporadically. 1 week there's plenty, the next week there's nothing, and you're back to cotton gauze for the eye compresses, and you notice the difference immediately and specifically in both the wound dressing context and the other context that doesn't appear on any official form. In April, a new nurse arrives. Her name is Vera Holland, and she's from Toronto, and she's 20 years old, and she has never done anything like this before. You know this because she tells you, on her first day, standing in the farmyard with her kit bag and an expression that is trying very hard to be composed and is only partly succeeding. They said it would be, the recruiter said, different, you say. Yes, it is. She looks at you. She's young in a way that is mostly the eyes, something open about them, something that hasn't learned to calibrate yet. It gets easier, you say. And then, because Private Lynch said this to you, and it turned out to be true, not because the things become easier, because you become better at them. She absorbs this with the solemnity of someone taking mental notes. Come on, you say. I'll show you the supply room first. That's where you need to start. You take her through the supply room with the same efficiency Sister Matheson used on you in August. The shelves, the organisation, the locked cabinet. At the bottom shelf, the Cellucotton crates. This is the material you want to know about, you say. Kimberly-Clark out of Wisconsin. Wound dressings primarily, but you pause. Also, other applications. Vera looks at the crates. She looks at you. There it is again. The look that means, I heard what you didn't say. Other applications, she says. The supply officer doesn't need to know the applications, you say. Just that you need it. She nods, very slightly. And where? She starts. Bottom left cabinet. You show her. Sister Matheson knows. You don't need to explain. Just ask if you need more. Another small nod. Something shifting in her face. The particular shift of someone who has just received information that is both practical and unexpectedly kind. Thank you, she says. Don't thank me. There's nothing to thank for. This is a supply room. This is what supplies are for. The summer of 1918 has a different quality from the summer before. The offensive and counter-offensive rhythm has changed. There are weeks when the station processes a volume that would have seemed impossible in the first month. Weeks when you and Eleanor and Bridget and Vera and the rotating cast of others move through shifts with the mechanical precision of people who've been doing this long enough that the technique has dissolved into reflex. And there are weeks of relative quiet, when the ward thins out enough that you can move between cots without turning sideways, and the operating theatre runs on scheduled rather than emergency hours, and Sister Matheson can occasionally be seen sitting in the kitchen at midday, eating a full meal seated. You've learned to treat this as a weather indicator for the station. In July, Dr. Hartley says something to you in the corridor. He's been in surgery since 4 a.m, a long, complicated case, and he's coming out of the theatre with the specific look of someone who has done everything that could be done and is calibrating whether it was enough. He stops when he passes you. He doesn't stop often. Morton, he says. Doctor. The man in the tent, the chest. How has the dressing been? You report. Factually, precisely. The progression of the wound, the changes in each dressing, the signs of healing or the absence of them. He listens. He makes a small sound that means continue, and then, what material? Cellucotton, you say, for the past 3 changes. He's quiet for a moment. Better than the gauze? Significantly. The exudate is managed better, less adherence to the wound bed. The removal causes less disruption to healing tissue. He looks at you. Write it up, he says. A case note, not for me, for the supply record. The properties of the material in comparison to standard gauze. Specific. Numbers if you have them. You look at him. I'll sign it, he says. A physician's signature on a supply assessment carries more weight than... He stops, starts again. The Red Cross coordinates supply assessment across all theatres. A signed clinical note supporting a material's properties will reach further than a nursing supply report. You're very still. Write it up, he says again. Bring it to me tomorrow. He walks past you down the corridor. You stand in the corridor for a moment, in the smell of carbolic acid and the late morning light, and you think about what he said. More weight than what? He didn't finish the sentence, and you know what the end of the sentence was, and the fact that he's offering to counteract it, to put his name, his credentials, his physician's authority behind your observations, is so unexpectedly generous that you have to make a deliberate effort to process it clearly. A physician's signature, the letter to Paris, the letters from the base hospitals, and now a clinical note signed by a surgeon. Things are moving. You write the note that evening. You spend 2 hours on it, drafting it 3 times. You cite specific cases. You note measurements, absorption rates as compared across materials, frequency of dressing changes required, patient comfort assessments based on systematic observation. You bring it to Dr. Hartley in the morning. He reads it. He makes 2 small corrections. Word choices, medical terminology sharpened, and then he signs it. James Hartley, MD, MRCS, Senior Surgical Officer, CCS 17. You fold the letter and put it in an envelope. You send it to Paris. August 1918. 1 year since you arrived. You don't mark it exactly. There isn't a way to mark it, and in any case the station is busy, but you're aware of it, the way you're aware of anniversaries even without planning to be. 1 year. You stand in the farmyard at the end of your shift and do what you've done every evening when you have the chance. You walk to the road and you look north and you think about what you've seen. Private Lynch, with his improving eyes, and his 4 sisters. Private Haggerty, whose leg is presumably walking him around somewhere. Private Swinton from Wolverhampton, whose grip was very strong and then wasn't. Sergeant Cullen, the typesetter, who said the most important things are the ones without clean words yet. Sister Mathieson, who has been at this since 1897 and has taught you more about the practice and discipline of caring for people than anyone before or since. And the material in the supply room, the white, soft, absorbent, reliable material in the wooden crates from Neenah, Wisconsin, that sits on the bottom shelf and does its work without needing to be discussed. The war will end. Everyone knows it, even if no one says so with confidence, because everyone has known it was going to end at various points for the last 4 years, and each time the ending receded and the middle continued. But the quality of things has changed. The spring offensive failed. Something is different now. Something in the direction of things. The war will end, and when it ends, the problem will still be there. In every home, in every city, in every country where women live with bodies that do what bodies do, every 4 weeks, without official acknowledgement. The problem will be there, and now, somewhere in a company in Neenah, Wisconsin, there will be people who know that a solution exists. The armistice is announced on a Monday morning. You hear it from Davies, who hears it from one of the ambulance drivers, who heard it from a dispatch rider who came through at 5 in the morning with a piece of paper and a look on his face that was a specific combination of shock and relief that would take days to resolve itself into something more like ordinary feeling. "They're saying it's done," Davies says, standing in the doorway of the ward. His expression is trying very hard to be carefully composed and absolutely is not. As of 11 o'clock, the 11th of November, they're saying it's done. The ward is quiet for a moment, and then one of the men, you never find out who, you never manage to attach the sound to a face, says something. Not loud, just a sound, a word or not quite a word, the kind of thing that comes from somewhere deeper than the planning mind. And then the ward is not quiet. Not pandemonium, nothing like that. But a sound, a collective sound, different from any other sound the ward has ever made. A sound that has relief in it, and grief in it, and something that is neither, but that fills the space between them. You stand in the doorway and listen to it. Sister Matheson is standing 2 feet to your left. She is absolutely composed. Her face is the face she always has, controlled, professional, present. But her right hand is gripping the door frame and her knuckles are white. You don't say anything. You stand there beside her and let the sound of the ward come through you. 11 o'clock. The 11th day of the 11th month. Done. The station doesn't close on the 11th of November. It doesn't close on the 12th or the 30th. The men who are here still need tending. The wounds don't know that the war is over. What changes is everything around the edges. The convoys stop. The front goes quiet. The artillery, that constant background weather that you stopped noticing in week 1 and started noticing in its absence, is just not there. The silence it leaves is vertiginous. You catch yourself listening for it in the night and finding only night. The men who are well enough to travel begin to move. The transport system, which has been running in one direction for 4 years, begins to reverse. Men going home rather than coming forward. You stay for 6 more weeks. Not because you have to, but because the work isn't finished, and because there's no good way to walk away from an unfinished thing, and because the men who are still here are the ones who need the most careful nursing. Sister Matheson stays too. Of course she does. In the last week of November, she takes you aside in the kitchen, a departure from her normal operating procedure of conducting serious conversations in the doorways of wards and corridors in transit, and she sits down at the kitchen table and looks at you. This is the most informal posture you have ever seen from her. You've done good work, she says, not effusively, as a statement of fact. This year, in particular, she pauses. You came here with good training and good instincts. You're leaving with something else. What's that, you ask? She considers for a moment. The ability to see the system, she says, not just the patient in front of you, the whole. She gestures, an uncharacteristically imprecise gesture. The supply chain and the staffing and the medical practice and the things that happen to bodies that we're supposed to pretend don't happen. You see all of it as a system, something that can be improved. You think about the letters, the Cellucotton, the clinical note, the material, you say. I know about the letters, she says. Of course she does. Was I? You start. You were right, she says, and you did it correctly. Observed, recorded, communicated through appropriate channels, coordinated with others. A pause. Just like nursing. It is nursing, you say. In a way, it's nursing the supply chain, identifying a gap and filling it. Sister Matheson looks at you for a moment with an expression you haven't seen on her before. Then she nods. Once. Yes, she says. Exactly. She stands. The kitchen conversation is over. She moves toward the door, then pauses. When you get home, she says, write more letters. She goes. You leave CCS 17 on a Tuesday morning in December. The farmyard looks different in December than it did in August. The stone darker with the wet. The trees bare, just the shapes of trees, the architecture of them visible without the covering of leaves. The mud in its December self frozen on the surface, giving way underneath. Davies carries your kit bag to the transport. Good luck, he says. Nurse Morton. Good luck, you say. Davies. He's going home next week. He told you this yesterday. He's from Cardiff. He has a sister and 2 brothers and a mother who has been knitting him things. The leg, he says. Haggerty. I heard from the base hospital. He was walking by October. Good, you say. That's good. You get into the transport. You look back at the farmhouse as the vehicle moves out of the farmyard. The stone and the windows and the converted stable and the tent and all of it. The thing that has been your life for 16 months. And you watch it until the bend in the road takes it. Eleanor is sitting beside you. She'd been transferred back 3 weeks ago and came back on her own time and her own money to see you off, which is the most Eleanor thing you can imagine her doing. She's reading a letter. Her face has the expression of someone reading something interesting. Kimberly Clark, she says without looking up. Forwarded through the Paris office. She hands it over. A brief letter from an executive named Ernst Mahler. He writes, "We have received with interest the clinical observations provided through the American Red Cross Nursing Division regarding the properties of our Cellucotton material in non-standard applications. We are in the process of investigating the commercial viability of such applications and would welcome further correspondence from nursing personnel with direct experience of the material's properties. Non-standard applications. Further correspondence. You fold the letter, you put it in your jacket pocket against your chest." Eleanor is looking out the other window. She's quiet, which is normal for Eleanor. "Sheffield first," she says eventually. "Cincinnati, you say. And then?" You think about going home, about the brick house on Fairview Avenue and your mother's 18-page letters, and the sense of smallness that home sometimes has after somewhere larger. "And then," you say, "I'll write more letters." Eleanor nods. The transport moves south toward the coast. The Atlantic crossing takes 9 days. You spend most of it in your cabin, writing. Letters to Eleanor, to Bridget, to Sister Matheson, to Vera, to the 3 nursing coordinators who replied to the Paris circular, but also something else. Notes about the properties of Cellucotton, specific, detailed, the kind of notes you'd write for a nursing school clinical assessment. But these are not for a nursing school. These are for someone who makes things. Someone in a manufacturing company who needs to understand not the wound dressing properties of their material, but the other properties. The softness, the lightness, the way it sits without moving, the way it absorbs without spreading, the way it can be used by any woman, anywhere, without asking anyone for permission or explanation or acknowledgement. The Atlantic moves under the ship. You write. At night, from your cabin window, you can see stars. Cleaner here than anywhere in Belgium. No artillery, no coal smoke, just the ocean and the sky. You sit with your notebook and look at the stars and think about Private Lynch and his 4 sisters and his 15 pairs of socks. "Write someone," he said. "Someone has written someone. Many someones have written many someones." You close your notebook. You listen to the Atlantic. Cincinnati in January is grey and cold and smaller than memory. Or not smaller, the same. But you are different, and the same is therefore smaller. Your mother meets you at the train station with fresh bread in a basket and 2 of your sisters on either side and your father slightly behind. Tall and quiet, who says your name when he sees you, and then doesn't say anything else, which is the most he's ever said. You eat the bread in the cab home. Your mother talks. You listen and don't say much, which is a change from before, and your mother registers the change and doesn't push it, which is also a change from before. The brick house on Fairview Avenue is exactly the same. This is startling in a specific way. The specific surprise of a place that continued existing in exactly the form you left it. unchanged by everything that has changed you. Your old room, your old bed, your old window, looking out at the neighbour's oak tree and the grey January street. You lie down on your old bed in your clothes, just to see what it feels like. It feels like being very far away from everything that happened, and also like being exactly where it happened, because it happened in you, and you are here. In February, you take a position at Cincinnati City Hospital. You need the income and the work is familiar, and the hospital is glad to have nurses with CCS experience, which they treat with a particular respectful curiosity, as though you've come back from another planet. The other nurses ask you questions. The doctors defer to your assessments in ways that would not have happened before. You're good at your job, better than before. You're also writing letters. The correspondence with Kimberly Clark develops slowly, over months. You correspond first with a company representative, then with Ernst Mahler, who is particularly interested in the commercial possibilities. The correspondence is careful. Your letters describe the properties of the material in terms that are simultaneously medical and practical, using the double language that Eleanor first mapped out on the broken wall in August 1917. The properties that make it useful for one purpose are the same properties that make it useful for another. You don't say this directly, you say it in the specific selection of which properties you mention. Mahler's letters are similarly layered. He writes about female consumers and hygiene applications and personal comfort products. He never says the word you both know he means. He doesn't need to. You write 12 letters to Kimberly Clark between February 1919 and October 1919. Eleanor writes 8 from Sheffield. 2 other nursing coordinators write. Sergeant Cullen writes a brief piece in his Edinburgh newspaper, a full paragraph in a longer article about wartime medical innovation that describes the properties of the material in the same careful oblique way. And in 1920, Kimberly Clark releases the first commercial product. They call it Cotex. Cotton texture, a clean name, a neutral name, a name that describes the function without describing the function. They sell it in a box in drugstores. The box has a slot in it where you can put money and take the box without asking anyone, without saying what it is, without performing the specific small humiliation of requesting a product that addresses a need that has always existed and has never been acknowledged. You buy one. In a drugstore on Vine Street in January 1921, 4 years and 5 months after the night you stood in a Belgian supply room and turned a pad of white absorbent material in your hands and thought, "This is better than anything." You put the coin in the slot, you take the box, you walk out. Nobody looks at you. Nobody needs to. This is the point exactly. Nobody needs to. 20 years later, your youngest daughter will buy these in a box at a pharmacy counter without thinking about it. 50 years later, your granddaughter will buy an improved version with better adhesion, with 100 small innovations built on the basic premise. She will know almost nothing about Cellucotton, almost nothing about CCS 17, almost nothing about a Tuesday morning in August 1917, when a nurse in Belgium opened a wooden crate from Wisconsin and noticed something. But she will have it. She will have it and take it for granted, which is the entire point of the thing being done properly, that it eventually becomes invisible, that it works so well it stops needing to be thought about. That is what good nursing looks like. That is what this was. But that is later. Right now, in the frame of this story, it is still August 1917, and you're still Agnes Morton, 22, from Cincinnati, and the night shift has just ended, and you have an hour, possibly 2, before it starts again. You're sitting on the broken stone wall at the edge of the old crop field, and the Belgian morning is coming in, grey and damp, and the artillery is doing what the artillery always does, and your hands ache from the carbolic soap and the work, and in your pocket there is a folded piece of tissue paper that you've been carrying since this morning. When you stood in the supply room and turned a pad of Cellucotton in your hands and thought, this is better than anything. Let the morning come. Let the light come over the low clouds the way it does here. Not the dramatic dawns of autumn Ohio, not the sharp copper light you remember from the Midwest mornings of your childhood, but this, the gentle, even, grey illumination of a Flemish morning. The sky not breaking open but simply brightening, becoming less dark, and then less dark, and then almost light. Let your eyes adjust. The field in front of you is grey-green in the morning light. The shell holes catch the sky, small mirrors of still water reflecting the gradual brightening above them. The weeds that have taken over what was once a planted field are bending very slightly in the morning wind. This is what Belgium looks like when nobody is trying to destroy it, or what remains of what it looked like, what it will look like again, someday, when there are years enough to let the grass grow back over the shell holes, and the drainage to restore itself, and the soil to recover from everything it's been asked to hold. Some things take time. Some things take more time than anyone plans for, but they happen. The ward is behind you. The men are sleeping, most of them, the ones who can, and Nurse Barnes is making her rounds, lantern in hand, moving the way you've learned to move in a full ward at night. Quiet, precise, not touching anything she doesn't need to touch, reading the ward by its sounds rather than demanding that it perform for her eyes. You're not needed for an hour. You are not needed. Sit with that. Your hands are in your lap. The raw knuckles, 4 cracks, you've been counting them, are catching the morning chill, which makes them hurt less strangely. The cold reducing the inflammation. The cold being useful. Your feet are inside your boots, and your boots are on the stone wall, and your feet hurt in the specific way that feet hurt after 16 hours on stone floors. A deep settled ache that starts at the ball of each foot and runs up through the arches and into the ankles, a kind of exhaustion that is in the bones rather than the muscles, that tells you the bones have been doing weight-bearing work for longer than weight-bearing work was designed to be sustained. Your back is the conversation that starts when everything else quiets down. Lower left. The specific geography of a 12-hour wound dressing schedule. Bending, straightening, reaching across cot frames, lifting and supporting and positioning. The muscles don't complain while you're doing it. They wait. They are very patient. And then when you stop, they file their report. Let them file their report. You're on a stone wall in August in Belgium, and the morning is coming and you have an hour. The sound of the artillery 22 miles away is a rhythm. Not a comfortable rhythm. Not the rhythm of something benevolent, but a rhythm nonetheless. Your body has learned it. Your sleep has learned it. You breathe to it sometimes without knowing you're doing it. Let your breath do what it does. In, out. The morning light on the shell hole water is brighter now. The sky fully committed to becoming day. The overnight clouds beginning to thin in places. A suggestion of colour at the eastern edge, above the tree line that marks the far boundary of the field. Pink. Very faint. Like something is beginning. You think about the Cellucotton. Not in the way you've been thinking about it all day. Not the analytical thinking, not the correspondence composing thinking, but just the way it felt in your hands. White, lighter than you expected. The springiness when you pressed it. the way your damp fingers left nothing on the surface of it, the moisture drawn immediately inside, the quiet efficiency of that, the way something can do exactly what it's meant to do and take no more space than it needs and leave no mess and require no acknowledgement. Good work, done quietly. That is what you've been trying to do since August 1916, since you walked into St. Mary's in your good dress and your best shoes, and the nervous certainty of someone who has made a decision about who she's going to be. The light is growing. The field is becoming more itself. The details sharpening as the grey gives way to something warmer. The individual blades of the weeds, the particular texture of the mud at the edge of the shell hole, the way the water in the hole is starting to catch a gold that isn't in the sky yet but is coming. Your hands in your lap, your aching feet in their boots. The smell of morning, mud and faint smoke and the very faint chemical ghost of the ward that will always be with you now, that has become as normal as air. And underneath it, something green. The specific smell of plants doing what plants do in the early morning, the metabolic morning work of being alive. You don't have to do anything right now. That is perhaps the strangest thing about this hour. You don't have to assess anything. You don't have to respond. You don't have to move quickly or record anything or make decisions about priorities. You can just be here, on this broken wall, in this morning. The hardest skill, it turns out, is not the wound dressing or the triage assessment or the negotiation with physicians or the management of a gas ward at 6 a.m. with inadequate lighting. Those are learnable. Those have steps. The hardest skill is this: to stop when stopping is permitted, and to actually stop, and to let the stopping be what it is instead of filling it immediately with the next thing. You are learning it. You're not good at it yet, but you're here. The pink in the east is deepening. The cloud is thinning. There is going to be sun this morning. That's not guaranteed in Belgium. The weather here is so reliably unreliable that you've stopped predicting it. But this morning the evidence is looking good. Sun. On the broken wall. On the shell hole water. On the field that used to be a field and will be a field again. Private Lynch will go home to Derry. Sergeant Cullen will go home to Edinburgh and his typefaces and his 7-fingered right hand, still capable of setting type, still doing what it was made for. Sister Matheson will... You don't know what Sister Matheson will do. You've never heard her speak about after, about beyond, about anywhere that isn't the ward. She might stay, for all you know. There might always be a ward that needs a Sister Matheson. You'll go home to Cincinnati, to the brick house, to your mother's letters that arrive in the body rather than by mail, letters of bread and organised closets and dinner at 6 and the particular comfort of a family that does not always understand you but does not need to, because it holds you without needing to understand you, which is its own form of love. You will go home, but first, this. The morning on the broken wall, the sun breaking through the cloud at the eastern tree line. There it is, a strip of actual gold, not golden but gold, the colour of something precious and unrepeatable, lighting the field from the angle that makes the grass tops glow and the water in the shell holes flash, and the distant farmhouse rooftops take on the colour of warmth. Here is the light. Here is the field. Here is the morning being itself. You are warm enough in your wool uniform jacket, which smells of carbolic and iodoform, and the honest human smell of a body that has been fully present and fully occupied. You are warm enough. You are fed enough. The bread at 8 o'clock, the tea, the cup of broth that Davies pressed on you at 5 without asking, which you drank standing up, and which was the best broth you've ever tasted, hot and simple and present. You are here enough. The sun is fully through now, the cloud moving east, the field brightening section by section as the light crosses it, the shell holes reflecting the sky. Blue now, actually blue, the first blue sky in a week, and the weeds gold-tipped, and the mud in the farmyard almost looking warm, almost the colour of something agricultural. The thought comes from nowhere, the way useful thoughts do when you stop trying to think. Someone will make it better. Not you, not just you, but someone. Eleanor with her flat Sheffield efficiency, Sergeant Cullen with his typefaces, Miss Harriet Edmonds at the Paris office, whatever executive at Kimberly-Clark is sitting with the clinical note signed by Dr. Hartley, and reading it and beginning to understand, someone will make it better. The product that doesn't exist yet. The name that doesn't exist yet. The day in a drugstore that hasn't happened yet where a woman will put a coin in a slot and take a box and walk out without saying anything to anyone, and it will not matter. It will not matter at all, because the thing she needs will be there for the taking, discreetly and commercially available. No permission required, no explanation required, no performance of need required. That day is coming. You can feel it coming the way you can sometimes feel the shape of a patient's recovery before the numbers reflect it. Not by certainty, but by the accumulated logic of observation. Things are moving, the letters are moving. The crate from Nina, Wisconsin, is moving through the supply chain. The nurses in the base hospitals are noticing and noting. Things are moving toward the thing they will become. And this morning, this very morning, this broken wall and this gold-tipped field and this Belgian sky. And this morning, this very morning, this broken wall and this gold-tipped field and this Belgian sky are enough. Not because the war is over. It is not. Not because the work is finished. It never is. But because something has shifted quietly, in the way real changes often do. Not with a speech, not with a parade, not with a man standing at a podium naming the discovery as if he owned it. Just a nurse, sitting on a broken wall after a night shift, carrying in her pocket the memory of a material that worked better than anything she'd been given before. In an hour, Sister Matheson will call your name, you will stand, your feet will protest, your back will tighten. Your hands will go back into hot water and soap and dressings and notes and the endless practical mercy of doing the next necessary thing. You will walk back into the ward, and nobody there will know that anything has happened. That is how this kind of history usually enters the world. Quietly, through a supply room, through a stained apron, through women speaking carefully around a subject they were never allowed to name directly, and then solving it anyway. Years later, people will talk about the product, the brand, the box, the advertisement, the company smart enough to sell it. But before all of that, there was this. Mud on the floor of a Belgian casualty station, a wooden crate from Wisconsin, a nurse with raw hands, another nurse who noticed, a letter written by candlelight, and a simple, almost embarrassing thought that turned out to be larger than anyone in that supply room could have known. This is better than anything. The bell sounds behind you, not loud, just enough. You close your eyes once, briefly, against the morning sun. Then you stand up, smooth your apron, put the folded tissue paper deeper into your pocket, and walk back toward the ward. Because the men are waiting. Because the day has started. Because history, like nursing, is mostly made by people who do the work before anyone thinks to thank them for it. Good night.